Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's MFEN lecture. Oh, we're getting 2 copies of it. Thanks. Tonight we're doing a double header. Emma Edwards and I are both going to do part of this. So we've prepared half of it each. So hopefully it'll all go very, very smoothly. And tonight we're talking about managing conflict between staff. So tonight's lecture is the first of 3 lectures about managing conflict. We've got conflict between staff tonight. We've got conflict between staff and patients next Thursday, because there's 5. Would you believe in a 30-day month there are 5 Thursdays? How did that happen? And then 2 weeks after that, we've got one on managing conflict between staff and patients' relatives. So that should address all of the learning outcomes in the MFEN core competencies section about managing conflict. If you want to check out the AFEN lectures on it as well, we have got an AFEN lecture coming up on managing violence aggression, which Emma will be delivering. So that's why we've got a bit of consistency here. Emma's going to do the violence and aggression lecture on AFEN. So she's contributing to the conflict lectures on MFEN, because then that gives us consistency across the piece and we don't do something stupid like contradict each other and confuse you all. So, Emma.
Hello.
Off you go.
Oh, hi everyone. I'm Emma Edwards, practice educator in ED in a hospital in South Wales. So thank you for listening today. Just some housekeeping before we get started. The session is being recorded and is available for catch-up. For those that are listening, please keep yourself on mute and then pitch in at appropriate times. Please ask questions and engage if anyone joins. You can press the pause button if you're watching it on catch up, just to make some notes and have food for thought. And if you want to any follow-up questions or anything, please contact FEN. If you want to speak, there is the holding down for the space bar for the mute. There is the chat function if you prefer to use that. If you're struggling with reception, it can be quite useful to turn the camera off to help with the Wi-Fi. And please don't share the codes unless you've received permission to do so. So as Jeanette had said, we've split this into 2 parts. So we've got some tips and tricks and some videos to play for the first half. And then we've got some theory to underpin the reasons why we do what we do. And Jeanette's going to go through some personality types and things that will help, because if you've got that wider understanding, it can help with team management, staff management, conflict, and self-awareness and developing your own skills. For the first part then, I'm going to be highlighting about raising awareness, how to create the right conditions to help manage or resolve conflict. You're not always going to resolve it, hopefully you can, but it's about managing it. As I mentioned, about tips and tricks, it's about getting your tool bag to help you with your leadership and management. Understand the importance of having that cuppa conversation. So there are many times during your working life that having that cuppa conversation can make a whole world of difference and nip things in the bud. I will touch on, after some of the videos, touch on coaching and compassionate leadership. You will have to go away and do further courses or further reading if you want more information. We're just going to touch on, as I said, some tools and tips and things, and these are elements that can be quite useful. So just to kick off, we're not going to go into communication, teaching you from the grassroots up, because you've all got excellent communication skills. You're all registrants, you're all very experienced, and you've probably got a very good in-depth level of self-awareness. So we're not going to teach you full communication skills, but we are going to give you some insight into some, as I said, conflict tips and tricks and things. So this is quite a funny caption that I came across when we were doing our research about preceptorship and buddying up with a nurse who's got really effective communication techniques, and she's boxing away. And we've all come across those types of personality types. They're not just nurses, they're everywhere in society. And over the years, you know, I've been called a dragon in my time. And you know,
surely not.
And I still do it. I'm a bit like a bull in a china shop sometimes, but you know, as I've matured and as I've grown up a bit, and I still do it now and again, and you know, hold the reins on, hold myself back, take a deep breath. How do I approach this? And as you develop your skills and as you mature into your profession, you will develop these skills. If I can do it, anybody can. Kicking off, so conflict. You've got the first resort on the left, and then you've got your last resort on the right. So the first resort, having that early conversation. So if conflict happens in the workplace, or a heated debate or a heated disagreement, try and nip it in the bud. To nip it in the bud early makes a massive difference to the flow of the team, how you feel, how the other person feels. Having that early conversation, it can be really difficult in a difficult working environment when you're full pelt, you're short-staffed, you're really, really busy. But having those minutes, even if it's only 10 minutes, to take yourself away with that person and have that cuppa conversation, that informal conversation, that cup of coffee type conversation, or the unofficial cigarette break that you're not supposed to be taking, as long as people know where you are, that can make a whole world of difference. And for me, I've done that many, many times, because most disagreements are simple misunderstandings or miscommunications, or I thought this and you thought that. And having those early conversations, those informal, out of the way conversations, can make a whole world of difference. The last resort, and that can be quite, you know, many weeks or many months or even a year or so down the line, when we're talking about using the hospital policies or the organisational policies that you work with, and that's going down mediation and involving human resources. If you belong to a union, which I hope you all do, the unions are there as well and can be very, very helpful and supportive should there be a need to go down this resort. Please read your policies. You will have lots of organisational HR contacts in your organisation. This is an example of the Wales Respect and Resolution Policy. Yours will be called something similar. They will all say the same things, because we're all working within a public service. We're all working to our code of conduct within an NHS environment. And there will be things that you have to do if you are going to go down the formal route. Within that policy then will be some visions and goals and learning and support, equity, inclusion, teamwork, all kinds of policies, your nursing strategies, your operational policies, your flow policies. Everything will be underpinned with these visions and values. Within our organisation, we talk about the 4 Ps, and it's about everything that's mentioned in your code of conduct. It's about being polite, being professional, being honest and trustworthy, patient-focused, working in a safe environment, and those cultural and leadership beliefs and values that will make us an effective and safe working public service, a front forward facing public service. And because we're in a very difficult time at the moment, coming out of COVID, you might have monkeypox evolving in your area, NHS environments, understaffed, they're very hard working. Some staff feel very drained on the back end of COVID. So all these things are still ongoing, and they can impact on how we behave in work, which potentially could create conflict. Why is it important to try and resolve an issue early on, that cup of coffee kind of conversation, because things can fester? And I've been there when I've come home from work over the years, and I plays on my mind. If you're anything like me, it plays on my mind over and over again. If I'd only said that, if I'd done that, I meant to say this. And you think, and it's playing over and over on your mind, and it's a bit like a grief cycle. You go through, you're upset, and then you go through your angry stage, and work through it. And sometimes that can take hours, sometimes it can take minutes, sometimes it can take weeks, depending on the circumstances and what you're going through in your personal and professional life. So letting it fester, letting it play out, can really upsetting, and it can affect people, and it can not just affect the people, those two potentially people involved, or that group of people that are involved. It can have a massive impact on the team and the team dynamic, especially if they've witnessed this. Poor relationships with co-workers. If you take a moment to think about how it's impacted you, if you've watched other people have an argument or a dispute in work, how uncomfortable that's made you feel as an individual. If you've been involved in that conversation, how upsetting that has made you feel. And then during the rest of your shift, say it happened at the beginning of your shift, you've got to work another 10 or 11 hours. You might have that playing on your mind. You might be very nervous. You might be very apprehensive. You might have to work the rest of the shift with that person back and forth during your shift. So that can make you really apprehensive and nervous, and you'll have physiological changes as well as psychological changes because of that. So those workplace stressors can have a massive impact in how you perform and how your team perform. So having those early resolutions makes a really big difference. We can go into that fight and flight mode, and we know that adrenaline can have a big effect on us. So we've got that danger, that threat, that physical and psychological effect. You've got that effect on your sympathetic nervous system. So you might be running back and forth to the bathroom because your stomach's upset, or you might feel nauseous, or you might not feel well enough to eat your dinner because your stomach's in knots, your adrenal glands are triggered, and you physiologically, your respiratory rate will go, your heart rate, you'll become hot and flustered potentially, and your blood pressure might go up, which is not good. And that's not what when we're working in a really difficult sometimes environment, frontline, as much as we love it, as much as we want to be there, and as much as we want to make a difference and we want to do the best for our patients, we don't want to have all these physiological and psychological negative effects on our body. And if that happens time and time and time and time again, you are going to become drained. And we want to try and avoid that where possible. We want to look after the team's well-being. This is a video that I came across a couple of years ago, and I was talking to Danette about it the other day when we were preparing for this lecture. And I came across it. I can't remember whether it was off Facebook or Twitter, and it was shared by Brian Dolan, and it was at the beginning of COVID. And I found it really insightful, really useful. And I said to Jeanette, I think this is really important to play this video. And if you can't hear it, if the sound doesn't play for any reason, you can YouTube it and it'll come up. It's a talk. He is called Chris Turner. He's a consultant in emergency medicine in Coventry and Warwickshire at the time that this video was made, and it was in 2019, and it was shared. I came across it at the beginning of COVID, so when there was lots of motivational pieces going out to keep the NHS going, because we were, struggling with COVID and working extra hours to try and help, and staffing pressures. So this was a motivational piece to make us think about teamwork, how important it is to have respect for our colleagues and that culture. He founded and still runs a campaign, and it's called Civility Saves Lives. And it's about that conversation, that communication. The aim is to raise awareness of the power of civility in healthcare and what a difference it can make. He discusses rudeness in teams and how it can turn deadly, and I'll let him talk about that. And he raises important points about how we behave towards each other and the difference between being okay to excellent and what a massive difference it can make during a shift. And I found it really, really excellent. Now, it takes about 15 minutes. There are some words that will come up as well if you can't hear for any reason. But as I said, it's on YouTube as well. So we want to try and avoid, oh, gone, didn't want to go there. Go back. We want to try and avoid this scenario where we've got, our backs to each other, that tug of war games. So this is why I thought playing this video now would be an appropriate time to share the message. I will just find I will pause this because I will have to come out.
Do you want me to play it in?
Oh, yeah. Can you?
Would that help?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Nice.
Right, I shall do that. Let me just hit share. Share sound. Anytime you like. There we go. Here he is.
Is HelloFresh worth the price? Absolutely.
Oh dear, we don't want to do that ad, do we?
It'll go in a minute.
There we are. Oh. There we are.
It was 2 a.m. when the paediatric alert bleep went out. The intensive care registrar and paediatric registrar arrived in the emergency department at the same time as an acutely short of breath 4-year-old girl. The nurses put on the monitoring, the doctors examined the child and spoke with the mother. And after a few moments, they met at the bottom of the bed. They had a discussion about what they thought should happen next. It was passionate, it became heated, voices were raised. And eventually they decided to go with maximum drug therapy and that they wouldn't do her breathing for her at this moment in time. The intensive care doctor left. He went back to his department and the paediatric doctor started trying to get intravenous access in the little girl's arm. The nurses asked, "What do you want us to give next?" And he replied, "Aminophylline." They spoke for a moment or two and then they leaned forward and said, "How do you make it up?" Because they were adult nurses and there were no paediatric nurses in this department overnight, and you make it up differently for children and adults. He said, "Look, just go and look it up, will you? I'm busy." So they did. They went away, they looked it up, and then they came back maybe 10 minutes later. When they got back, he was still struggling to get this intravenous line in. They said to him, "What rate do you want this to go at?" And he looked up and said, "For God's sake, leave me alone. Can't you see I'm busy?" And they did what we would all do. They took a step back. They took a step back and they waited. And they got the line in, they wrote the script, and then connected the drug through the pump, through the tubing, and into her arm. And over the next half hour, she received 15 to 20 hours worth of aminophylline, a very toxic drug. So what happened next? Well, after a rocky few hours, she did just fine. But there was, of course, an incident form. There was, of course, an investigation. What did that find? It found that the nurses hadn't been competent. It found that the nurses needed retraining. In fact, the nurses shouldn't be allowed to give any drugs till they'd had retraining, and there might have been some communication issues. And I think we missed the point, and I think we missed the chance to be better. Many of us work in teams. Healthcare is no different. We deliver it in complicated, sometimes complex environments with varying outcomes. And for the last 10 years, as well as being an emergency medicine consultant, I've been a safety lead, investigating and trying to understand situations just like this one. And if 10 years ago you had come and asked me, said, Chris, what do you think the answer is? I'd have been totally clear with you. I'd have said it's process. If only everybody did what they're meant to do. But there's a problem with that. You can only investigate so many of these when you know that the people involved are knowledgeable, good, diligent professionals before you realize that you must be missing something. And I was missing this. Process is written on paper, but practice happens between individuals and in environments, and I simply wasn't respecting the complexity of the situation. So now, if people come and ask me, what do you think the answer is? I still think process has its place, but something else is more important, and that's people. And I think the evidence bears me out on this. So if we work in teams, what makes teams perform better? Well, in 2015, Riskin and Erez published the first of their landmark papers. In it, what they did was something that hadn't been done before. They took teams who were matched for expertise, and they put them into a patient simulator, and they measured the outcomes. Half of those teams were exposed to mild rudeness. And what did they find? They found, unsurprisingly, that we grade on a curve. We grade from the truly fantastic care that we all want for ourselves and for our loved ones, all the way around to the catastrophic care where patients die unnecessarily. And they found that one factor was responsible for 40 to 60% of that variance, and that's incivility or rudeness. In fact, it looks like for competent teams, the single most important factor determining the outcome of that team is how we treat each other. So incivility. If it's such a big deal, how come we don't know about it? I never got taught about it in medical school, in my membership exams, or my fellowship exams. And it's because this is new science. Between 1996 and 2000, on all of the academic papers, there were only 23 about incivility, rudeness. Between 2011 and 2015, there were 1,700. And they pretty much all say the same thing, that this stuff counts. So I should ask, has anybody here seen rudeness at work? Maybe to you, maybe to somebody near you, or maybe it's been by you, and it's certainly been by me. How did it feel? Now, my guess is it's a bunch of people, when they're thinking about it, feel angry. But that's not where we start off. In the moment when it happens to us, we feel belittled, ashamed, humiliated. We feel powerless, like children. And then slowly, over minutes, sometimes hours, sometimes days, we start to make sense of it. And then we find ourselves saying, how dare you? How dare you treat me like that? And that's when we find the anger. So today, I'd like to talk about two of the groups that are affected by incivility. Because now, thanks to the wonderful work of people like Christine Porath, we're able to put some numbers onto this. And to do it, I'd like to talk about bandwidth. Because on a good day with a following wind, we're pretty smart people, and we can deal with 5 to 7 things. But we have lives, we have cars, bills, houses, family, and it takes up space. So by the time we get to work, we're maybe dealing with 3 or 4 things. What happens when somebody is rude to another person? What happens to the recipient? And I'm talking here about mild to moderate rudeness. I'm not talking about screaming and shouting in your face. That's completely different. On average, when somebody is rude to us in a mild to moderate way, our bandwidth reduces by 61%. And then we cart it with us through the day. We cart this thought of what on earth happened. And then at the end of the day, we get in the car or on the bus, and we're sitting there and we feel a wee bit safe, and our bandwidth starts to open out again. And then we have that moment where we go, boom, that's what I should have said. That's what I would have said to him. And that's because in that moment, you're back. You're back to being the wonderful, smart, witty self that you are. And in the moment, you weren't. In the moment when it happened, we are quite literally less. When we do it to somebody else, we make them quite literally less. But what about staff onlookers? Well, I'm reminded of an episode in the emergency department. My colleague had tried to refer a patient onto the neurosurgical team. And the neurosurgical registrar had said, no. And I know him, and he's a good guy. I didn't know that he was a good guy having a bad day. I said, let me go and chat to him. I'm the big man. So I went along, and I said, got this patient, really like you to see her, neurosurgical problem. He said no. Second tactic. Listen, you know that patient? I'm pretty sure it's a neurosurgical problem. If I'd been smart enough at medical school, I'd have really liked to be a neurosurgeon. And you're here, and you think I'm joking, that really works. And you're here, and he said no. And I'm maybe beginning to get a wee bit angry. So I decided to drop the C-bomb, because that's the way I roll. And I said to him, I need you to see this patient. I am telling you to see this patient because I am the consultant. And he looked at me. There's quite a lot of eye looking going on at this point. And he looked at me and he said, did this. What do I care? I'm going to be a consultant someday myself. And I had nothing except this. I can tell you in here today that the red mist can descend from the Pentland Hills, just outside Edinburgh, all the way into an emergency department in Midlands in under about half a second. And as I stood there, and my voice got louder, deeper, and more Scottish, and I drew myself up to my full 5'7.5". I saw two things happening. The first was that my wonderful, fantastic, amazing colleague, the nurse in charge, did precisely what her title says. And she belted round her desk and she charged across to us because whatever this crap was, she wasn't going to let it happen in her department. And the second thing was this. I saw the heads starting to go down. First one, pop. Then another, pop, then pop, 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 pop. All these heads going down all around, all apart from one guy. It's about 3.5 meters in that direction. And he's leaning against the desk and he's watching. And in my corrupted memory, he's opening a packet of crisps and getting a can of Coke out, because this is the most fun he's going to have all day. And I thought those guys were just going back to work, but they're not. The first thing they're doing is avoiding the Eye of Sauron, because we know that the way that somebody has just treated the last person is likely to be the way that they treat the next person. And something else is happening as well, because they actually have their bandwidth impacted too. And on average, they are 20% reduced in their performance. But there's more. Because if they get up and they walk around the corner and somebody asks them for help, they're then 50% less likely to help that person. This stuff is simply contagious. So is change possible? This is 1959. Western General Hospital in Edinburgh, the NHS is 11 years old, and this is my mum. And next to my mum, Charlotte and Julie, they were forged as junior nurses in the NHS. They still meet and they still have coffee together. And on the ward, twice a day, one of my mum's jobs is to clean the ashtrays. Because there's an ashtray on every single bedside locker. Patients are being encouraged to go for a cigarette. It's good for the nerves. In fact, if you don't smoke, maybe you'd like to think about taking it up. And then we learned the terrible toll that tobacco takes on health. What did we do? We stopped smoking. We stopped advising people to smoke, and we stopped supporting it. So now it's 2019. We're beginning to understand the impact that behavior has on team performance. And that's great. What a wonderful opportunity. Because by choosing to behave in ways that value and respect the people around us, we help individuals and teams to perform at their peak. In my world, civility can literally save lives. But for all of us who work in teams, who work with people, civility can be the difference between okay and great, no matter what we do. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Am I back?
Are you good to go, Emma?
Yeah. Is the screen back up?
Well, yeah, we're back to normal now.
Yeah, back to the civility advert. Okay, so what did you think of that? If you take a moment to reflect on what he said, especially the second scenario, what an impact that event can have on your team, not only the individuals involved, the decrease by 61%, but the effect on the team of 20%, and then the willingness to help in the next situation a bit later in the shift, reduced potentially by 50%. That bandwidth, that really resonated with me when I listened to it, because as he said, we've all got busy family lives, and we've got different things going on at different stages. This time of year, if you've got teenagers like me, you've got GCSE exams, A-level exams, so trying to help the children get ready for that. The day-to-day busyness of life, childcare, the impact of staffing and COVID and changing shifts and things, work-related pressures that are happening on a day-by-day basis. So all of these we can relate to. I'm sure that everything he just talked about, if you've got been in the NHS a little while, hopefully you wouldn't have witnessed poor behaviour and conflict. But if you have, I'm sure you can relate to what he was saying. And that bandwidth and how it reduces. So being aware of how it impacts, that nurse in charge intercepting, that potentially, as you develop your skill set and you do become the nurse in charge of a shift, you may be that person running around the nurse's station to intercept those two colleagues having a heated discussion in front of the patient. And you will be ushering them out of the way of the patient and into a private room to finish their conversation. So that can be, you've got that helicopter overview as the nurse in charge, and you're all seeing, you've got like the third eye. But that's really important, because you're a massively important part of that shift and the way the shift runs. So having that presence, knowing that the staff can come to you, not only to help them on a clinical and professional basis, but on a personal basis as well, can make a massive difference to how the shift runs. Going into some concepts with, as I mentioned earlier, some tips and tricks into things that may help. Coaching is a buzzword that's really popular. I don't know whether you've come across it in the areas that you're working. It's often described as the meeting of two minds. Nancy Klein wrote a book, Time to Think, and it's a brilliant coach is the one who brings out the brilliance of minds. It's about maturing that human brain. Can be a really powerful tool that can help create a more productive, engaged and fulfilled employees. It's a way of behaving. It's a way of communicating with your team, nurturing them, empowering them, developing them. And if you've got the opportunity within your organisation to go on any kind of coaching introductory session or a coaching course, internally or externally, if they're offered, I would highly recommend it. I did do a one-day course quite a while ago, and I found it quite enlightening. And with anybody that's got any kind of in leadership or management role, you will resonate with some of the messages. It's slightly different to mentorship and preceptorship, because it's all about listening to the individual, planting the seed, watching them grow, nurturing them, guiding them, and helping them, but not doing it for them. So it's a slightly different model to mentorship and preceptorship. Really useful if you get offered the opportunity to go on it. Why have I mentioned coaching? Well, because of the benefits that it can give you to help manage conflict. From an organisational point of view, if you've got some coaching skills and some tips and tools under your belt, it can help from a HR point of view, because it can avoid that formal mediation, that formal HR process, because you'll nip it in the bud early. As a manager, it can be really quite fast and simple to set up a coaching model within your organisation or your department, building up those soft skills, building up that self-awareness, those personal and professional skills that can make a big difference at the shop floor level. And then money and cost savings. So if we're doing all these good therapeutic things to develop our team and to resolve conflict at an early stage, well, then the staff won't go sick and you won't have a high turnover in staff. You won't have long absences. You won't have long periods of sickness and absence and grievances. So it can have a lot of impact and be very powerful. Creating that psychological safety. So this was
I'm sorry to disturb. Were you expecting us to be looking at your slides at this point?
Oh, are they not playing?
You're not sharing.
Oh,
sorry. I just thought, oh, she is actually pressing a button there and expecting to share, but it's not.
I do apologise. I thought I had.
Did we miss a nice pretty picture?
Right, hang on a minute. Where's the... I stop that. Why is the share button come off then? Did it come off when you played the video, maybe?
Probably.
Sorry, guys.
We've missed out on a picture, haven't we?
Yes.
I'm sure we can manage the picture then.
Right, let's go back. Sorry, guys. So, are we back on now?
We're back on now.
Right. So if I go from the current slide, there,
That's it.
this is my definition of coaching. Coaching is an incredibly powerful tool that can help create productive, engaged, and fulfilled employees. So the meeting of the two minds. And then the next slide is the summary of the benefits within an organization for all those points that I made.
Thank you. That looks lovely. You went to some trouble to go do that slide, so I'm glad we've seen
it. Creating psychological safety. So I find I'm quite visual when I teach. It processes quite, and I remember things quite nicely. So this picture here, that psychological safety, you've got all those beautiful, beautiful dogs there, lined up, ready, and you're like, oh my goodness me, that nervous poor cat. Are they just not bothered and just going for it, or it's that poor cat actually running for its life because they're all there watching? And so,
or is it just strolling by going, bring it on, guys?
Big and brave, and some days you feel big and brave, and other days you don't, and you withdraw, and that's human nature. And if you think about Maslow's hierarchy and all the different things that can impact on how we behave, and what makes us feel safe, we can resonate with different analogies there. I can remember a long time ago when we first went into major incident mode, and I was a very junior nurse, and there was it was the first time experience of going into major incident mode, and we were setting up the recess, and everything was very different. Lots of people involved, lots of surgical consultants that we never seen, but we've heard the stories as you do, as the word spreads through the organisation. So they all appeared to help in the recess, and I ended up opening a pack, and it was like, say I opened the catheter pack, but it was the wrong pack. I should have opened the central line pack. I can't remember which way round it was, but that was because I was all fingers and thumbs, and I was really nervous to be in the presence of all these surgical consultants that I wouldn't normally work with. So working with different people, working with people that we don't know, putting that pressure on ourselves, which is daft really, because we're all there to help the patients and work together. But simulation and learning to work with each other and teamwork can make a massive difference. So safety is important in your professional working environment. The mind is like an iceberg. So it talks about what's on the surface. So that's what we see, what we're doing, the busyness. Me with my deep gruff voice and 100 miles an hour sometimes running through the department, hell for leather. But then what's going on underneath? What's under the water? And you've got all these different life things, all these beliefs, feelings, all these many different things going on underneath. And for coaching, for leadership, for management, for managing teams, for managing individuals, for managing conflict, taking a breath, holding still, having a moment to reflect, not only on your own behaviour, but to what's that individual going through, can be quite insightful and quite useful. The behaviours and the motions, as we said, we've got the weed above the surface, but at the root, what's going on underneath? What's the need? What's that individual going through? What do they perceive has just happened? Why has it happened? Asking these questions can be quite useful. Breaking that negative self-belief. Quite a few years ago, I had a situation where I went through some mindfulness for my own well-being, and I found it quite useful experience. We were talking, the person that I was talking through that was helping me through the crisis that I was having at that time, and they were talking about, you know, not to focus on the negative. What's positive, what's gone well today? And if you, during COVID, I don't know whether you developed them in your organisation, but they were very popular within the NHS improvement models, a finish your shift home checklist. So you sort of compartmentalise the end of your shift. So you're not taking your monkeys home with you, you're not taking your baggage home with you. So during the busyness of your shift, and in a busy ED department, all these 101 things will have happened. Some really sad things might have happened. Well, you've got to process that, because you've got to go back home, you've got to do the lunch, the ironing, the busyness of life, or wind down. And it's really important to have that end of shift closure, and that's really, really powerful, and I would recommend that you encourage that. So breaking that negative belief cycle, the beliefs, the thoughts, the emotions, the behavior, everything that's under that root, everything that's under that iceberg. Habits, you can get into bad habits. Oh, that was a terrible shift, that was and you're copying phrases and words, and you're picking up on what other people's negativity is, and it's a bit like a Ferris wheel. Stop it, take a beat, take a breath. What have I achieved today? What have I done to make a difference today? And when you're managing conflict, that can be really helpful to have those open conversations as well. Intervention, coaching at an early stage, that early cup of coffee, that time out, following it up at an appropriate time can make a big difference. That 90-10 principle, so 10% of life is what happens to you, but 90% of life is decided how we choose to react. So I've been there when I've been, you know, something's happened between myself and a colleague, a disagreement, and I've had to take myself out of the department, out of iShop, because I need to vent. I need to have that moment, because that's how I needed to process. And different people process in different ways. But I needed that 2 minutes out, because then I could go back, I could face my patients, and I could carry on doing what I needed to do. So that can be really powerful. Having that self-awareness is really important. Compassionate leadership. So compassionate leadership is a buzz phrase, is a word. And again, I'm only going to introduce it to you. I'm not going to go into detail, but it can be really useful for conflict management. So it's about attending, about being there, being in the zone, being in the moment, listening to what they're saying, paying attention to each other, picking up on those ones that are underperforming, or you notice that they're suffering, or they're not behaving quite how they normally would. Sometimes if you can capture that early, you can nip the conflict in even before it happens. Understanding what's going on. So you've got understanding what is causing the other's distress by making an appraisal of the cause. Empathizing and helping, having an empathetic response, be our relationship with the other's distress. So it's not sympathy, it's empathy. So empathy is really powerful, and I have got another slide there. In conflict resolution, empathy is really powerful and helpful. Listening with fascination, being present, being in the zone, taking that time out to listen to what you may not agree with what they're saying, but they've been listened to, they've been heard. That can make a massive difference to how your team or that individual performs. This is another summary of what we've just said. Would you recognise your soul if you met it on a dark night? Oh, that's a pondering thought.
Ouch, that's painful, isn't it? Would you recognise your soul if you met it on a dark night?
Yeah.
Ow.
Yes. So compassionate behaviour compass, you know, so being present. Have we listened? Have we done it to others, or can we do it for others? Understanding the dependence, the listening, the challenges that we lead and face in work, empathizing, feeling the strains and pains and anxieties and frustrations of others that may feel overwhelmed. We've all had those moments in work where we've come across a staff member that has felt overwhelmed. How do we manage them? How do we help? Helping. We're here, we're all nurses, we're compassionate. That's why we do our job. It's not just about the patients, it's about the team now as you become a senior member. So you want compassionate leadership, you want to look after that team. The next video that we've got is a short video. It is an American cartoon video. And again, it was shared during COVID when we needed all these motivational things to help us get through the difficulties and all the changes that we were going through in the early stages. And this video, even though it's an American video, again, it had some really powerful messages about compassion and about culture and how we treat each other and how that can help with managing conflict. So I believe, Jeanette, you've got the next video.
I am ready to share, yes.
So I hope you found this as insightful as I did.
Hang on, share sound, yes. Do that one. Come on. I think you might have to unshare before I can share.
Stop. I will stop and I will start again next time.
Okay, and it's this one.
That's it. Please excuse the adverts.
Right, sound down.
You have found yourself working in an emergency department. We are so happy you are here. Thank you for coming to lend us a hand. We won't forget it. We can imagine that this place feels different than the wards or the operating theater or clinic. Some of those differences have to do with the type of patients we see, the decisions that we make, and the care we provide. But much of it has to do with something even more fundamental than that, emergency department culture. That culture is the culmination of the values, beliefs, and practices that make us who we are. As an anthropologist and emergency medicine resident, I'm going to share with you a few key facets of emergency medicine culture that will facilitate your rapid transition to our side of the consult. Emergency medicine is a team sport. This is easy to say, but what does it actually mean? It means we fundamentally believe that every single person on the team plays an integral role in providing care and keeping the machine going. How do we live that value? We learn people's names. We say please and thank you. We seek input from nurses and paramedics, and we ask the unit clerk about his kids. Staff call us by our first names. We pitch in where we can, getting a patient water, changing linens, helping porter patients, etc. And we try to do all these things with a smile. We check in on each other after tough cases. We are honest with our feedback, and we ask our colleagues how we can help. There is no room for ego. We live this value because we are humans, and it makes the workplace more fun. And because we rely on every individual on the team to be psychologically safe in critical moments when we must rely on them to speak up. We know that teamwork makes the dream work, especially in trying times. Welcome to the team. The charge nurse is the boss. There's not much more to say about this one. It's just the truth. Embrace it. They are the ones who are there for 12 hours a day, and their only goal is to maintain situational awareness with regards to the whole department and the rest of the hospital. Perfect is the enemy of good. This reality might make you feel uncomfortable. We have a strong duty to individual patients, yet sometimes we are forced to come up with good but not perfect plans for them. This will probably become even more relevant as the pandemic ramps up. Good questions to ask yourself include, does this seem safe? Or would other doctors think this is reasonable given the circumstances? Or will I sleep tonight with this choice? If the answer to all those questions is yes, then your plan is probably a good one. It may not be perfect, but it's good. Striving for absolute perfection in the emergency department, while admirable, may impair your ability to do the most good for the most number of patients, and it might actually destroy your soul. This isn't an excuse to cut corners, be lazy, or provide substandard care. Rather, it is a realization that we are making difficult decisions with limited information without the luxury of time. We usually do that very well, but we can't always do it perfectly, and that's okay. We are good at being wrong. Because we are good but not perfect, see point number 3, sometimes we are wrong. This job is humbling. The radiologist will report a fracture in the final x-ray report for that patient you sent home with an ankle sprain the night before. Internal medicine might identify a PE in the patient you referred with a COPD exacerbation. That STEMI that went to the cath lab, well, that was actually a dissection. Every time we hear about these cases, our hearts sink a little bit. We think and sometimes perseverate about what we could have done differently, what we missed, what we should have seen, and how we can move closer on the spectrum towards perfect. After getting over the initial gut punch, usually through talking to colleagues, see point number 1, we incorporate any lessons into our practice and then see the next patient. For more on this, check out other related resources on the emergency medicine mindset. We love asking for help. This one you probably already know. Emergency physicians excel at asking for help. In fact, it is something we are best at. You are usually on the receiving end of those phone calls. Now, we are here for you, no matter what. There's no stupid question. Worried about a patient? Ask for help. Don't know where something is? Ask for help. Don't know what to do? Ask for help. Want an extra set of eyes on a rash? Ask for help. You can officially call yourself an emergency physician when you ask more questions on a shift than you answer. I hope that this gives you a glimpse of the values, beliefs, and practices that are common to most emergency departments in Canada. Of course, culture is local, and there will be variations and differences to these themes. For more insight into the culture of emergency medicine, check out the below posts on the EM mindset on Rebel EM and First 10 in EM. For a more in-depth look at specific values, beliefs, and practices in the culture of emergency medicine, check out my anthropologic study on the topic also below. We're grateful to have you on board. Most importantly, you will be surrounded by all sorts of people that want you to succeed. Be like us, ask for help. Maybe you just need the password for a locked bathroom, or maybe you want someone to chat with about a bad case you've just had. We support each other in the ED. You have been adopted into our family, and you are now part of our tribe. Welcome to the Emerge family.
Did you find that useful? I know I did when I first watched that, and I was introduced to it, as I said, during COVID. And that culture, we've all got in our personal reviews, our operational policies, values, beliefs, practices, operational policies and procedures or standards that we have to meet. But that culture, the way we behave towards each other, teamwork, if we've got all good practices in place, a friendly, approachable team that you can trust and work with, hopefully you're not going to avoid conflict, but hopefully you can mitigate against it. And if anything does happen, you can resolve it early on. I'm just going to share my screen again.
Oh, well done. Well done. I was about to say, it looks like you're going to show me a screen, but I can't see it yet.
Yeah, it's disappeared again.
Your videos have gone down very well with the live audience.
Ah, well done. I did find them really good. Right. Why am I not sharing? Have they come up yet?
Nope.
Nope. One moment. Where's the... Oh, I got it now. I found it. That's because I got too many tabs open. I do apologize, guys. Sorry. Okay, so following on from that video, there's just a few more slides to go.
Do you want to do it on slideshow?
Jeanette's gonna take over after you've had a quick... Oh, I didn't mean to do that. I meant to go to the next one. We want to go...
That one.
That's it. So scenarios. When I was talking to Jeanette, we were talking and sharing experiences that we have heard of or shared or had been part of in some shape or form. And I'm sure you can relate to this. So these are some of the examples that you might come across conflict with staff in your working environment. So one of the most common ones in an ED might be conflict between site management teams and the nurse in charge because of the competing pressures. So we all know that we've got lots of different.
Oh dear, she's frozen.
But knowing if we can trust each other and have that respect and have that open dialogue and working together can mitigate against some of those conflicts. Specialist doctors versus the nurse, about working together or working practices. So for example, an orthopedic doctor wants to put a plaster on, but that's not the way the nurse is taught, and the nurse has to do the way that they're taught, because that's why they're covered by vicarious liability, because they've got competence and standards to maintain. Doctors sometimes work very differently to the way nurses do because of their experiences and their training themselves, and that can cause conflict between the nurse and the doctor. So it's about having that open dialogue and understanding where each other's coming from, and you work to your code of conduct, and sometimes you need to use that name drop like Chris did, or that policy drop to help manage that situation. Underperforming is a popular one, or the hangry person is a popular one. So Jeanette and myself both shared examples of where we've come across staff members, and if they didn't have their sugar fix by 9 or 10 o'clock, or their chocolate milkshake, or their meals, their performance was different. So knowing your team and knowing how to manage your team and encouraging them to have these very important breaks and eating and drinking can make a massive difference to how that team performs and avoid conflict. Nurse in charge breakdown in communication. So as the busy nurse in charge, you've got this excellent helicopter situational awareness of a very busy, big department, and you rely on people coming back and forth with lots of information, and you want that information in a timely manner. Occasionally, because of the organised chaos and the type of environments that we work in, the patient's condition changes. It can be very fluid. The capacity within an area can be changed very dramatic quickly. So that communication is pivotal, and sometimes that doesn't happen in a timely manner, or there's a bit of important information that the nurse in charge really should have had earlier, because that would have impacted on the decisions that she was making. So having that respect can make a big difference. Following up referrals after long waits. So it may be that the nurse in charge or the consultant in charge will be ringing up saying, oh, you know, poor old Doris has been waiting for the surgeon now for 3 hours. We've got a bed on a ward. We need a scene. We need a plan so we can get her, or she's in pain and we've been waiting a long time. And it may be that this poor surgeon has got so many competing pressures elsewhere in the hospital. He's only got one pair of hands. So it may be something as simple as, have you asked for help? Have you spoke to your registrar? Is there anything I can do to help? Can I get the registrar? Can we contact your consultant? Not that you want to say that they're not incompetent at all, but if they've got a lot going on and you can't see that, sometimes having that open dialogue can be really helpful and avoid arguments. Refusal and delays to accept policies and pathways. So Chris gave some examples there in the videos, and I'm sure you've come across that in your working world. So how would you, if you take a moment to think about how would you get around that? What would you do differently if you came across that person next time? Having these strategies, having these tools and tips can help to manage, and you have a different outcome then. And sometimes it's just about listening. Clinical meetings. I've been in a meeting where two consultants, two different specialities, have had conflicting opinions about what we were discussing, and like the nurse in charge and video example they gave, I interceded and made some mediation suggestions, compromise, and it sort of calmed the waves, and then the conversation can go on. And that's really insightful and important as the nurse in charge, that you develop these skills to prevent things escalating and get in there early. Some of the other examples: ringing wards to expedite transfers. Relationships. We had a lecture, one of the MFEN lectures we had recently, they were talking about the importance of relationships and what a difference that can make to your working world. So if you know some of these ward staff members and you're saying, oh, can you do me a favour? Any chance I can bring them up now? I know you said you wanted another 20 minutes, but I got X, Y, and Z going on. Can you help me out? Those relationships, that can make a big difference, rather than the poor nurse going up there and the ward's not prepared, and then there's an argument in front of the patient, and that's not what we want. These poor patients are in pain, they're acutely unwell, and they've come here for help, and they want to be in that safe space. And then the team members, they're working really, really hard. They don't want to be arguing and feel threatened and upset by each other. That's not what we're here for. Some other quick examples then: ambulance versus triage nurse. I'm sure if you take a moment to think, you might have some stories to share there. Staff disagreement during shift. It's not going to happen every shift. It may not happen on a weekly basis. And sometimes you have to agree to disagree because of your beliefs and your own beliefs and bias. The other one, it's not always verbal, it's not always present, emails and messages. And I've been involved in this over the years. WhatsApp messages, emails, think about social media in your professional world. A couple of sentences, they can be easily misinterpreted. What I meant was, and it can cause a whole host of anxieties and upset unintentionally. So taking a moment to think, oh, what's the best word? Is this polite? Is this compassionate? Some of the useful resources, just to finish up then before Jeanette takes over. I've mentioned about the checklist at the end of the shift. If you were having a conflict conversation with a staff member, you may have that open dialogue, and it's about encouraging them to talk and listening to what they're having to say. And if you need to have some motivational conversations, what does a healthy working day look like to you? What's your thoughts? And sometimes working through that with them can be quite insightful, because you'll have an understanding about how they work. This is an example of a performance wheel of an individual person, and you can relate to all of those factors within there. So that's within our personal life. And then if you score yourself with a situation, and then you look at your professional working world and you scored yourself there, this is an example of a team leader competencies. And you can do the two. And in exercises where they've done leadership and management and conflict training, they have found it really useful with the individuals attending the courses, because it's about raising self-awareness and insight, because you might score yourself quite low in some aspects. And actually, if I improve those aspects, I can actually be a more effective leader, a more compassionate leader, and that will help you with conflict resolution. So you might find that a useful exercise to do in the future, if you can. Listening, I've already mentioned, quiet. Oh, that's difficult, isn't it? Quiet. We don't have quiet in an A&E department very often. We like noise, we like busyness. And I love to talk. I can talk for Britain, as you can guess. But listening can be very powerful. And when you're looking at conflict and managing conflict, it's about reflective listening. It's about listening to what they're saying, summarising what they're saying, because it's about their perceptions and what they're feeling, and sometimes you might not be able to resolve it, but the fact that you've acknowledged it, you recognize it, you might not be able to put a plaster over it and make it better, but the fact that you've acknowledged it and listened to it can make all the differences into that person's recovery and potentially resolve that early stage of resolution. Remember to build up a rapport. So these are some tips then, summarising from the videos and some of the points that I've mentioned. So find common ground, build trust, become comfortable, find that safe space to talk, that psychological safety. Understand their perceptions, what their feelings, clarify, use open questions, use listening. Be present in the moment, don't be yawning and avoiding eye-to-eye contact. Use your body language. Rather than sitting opposite them, which can be quite intimidating if you're having a conflict kind of resolution conversation, have a more natural conversation. So they talk about a triangle. So if there's 3 people and you're mediating, have a triangle rather than sit opposite each other. That can make a massive difference in the comfort and that psychological safety. Use active listening skills. Listen with fascination. These are not to-dos. So yawning, talking over, I'm terrible at doing this. I get so wound up when I'm in a meeting sometimes and I listen to something and I think, oh, I know, and I want to, and I don't mean to interrupt. And it's really difficult on Teams as well, because sometimes you've got delays with the signals and the messages, and I forget to put my hand up on the Teams meeting, which is the professional etiquette thing to do. So I have to sit on my hands and keep that now for the appropriate time. The tone of the voice, I've got a really deep gruff voice, so when I meet new people, I think, you know, I come across as being in the moment, sometimes aggressive, but it's not. I've got a deep gruff voice. I speak my mind. I'm 100 miles an hour. That's my personality. I'm not going to have a personality transplant, but I've got self-awareness to manage that. And then I got described as a chocolate clear one. So I'm all hard on the outside and soft and gooey on the inside. So that's where the compassionate nursing element comes in. So knowing that things about yourself can make a big difference when you're there as a person resolving conflict, or trying to prevent it, or in learning and empowering staff for the future. To be a good coach, you need to have empathy. So empathy is like giving somebody a psychological hug. We all need those from time to time. And empathy as nurses, we've got that in abundance. So we need to have that between our team and our colleagues. When we're having that compassionate conversation, you can't put the sticky plaster, as I said, over it and relieve their suffering, but sometimes by acknowledging it and listening it, there may be things that you can do, even if it's simple things like changing their shifts or their start or finish times, or letting them go to have their break because they need that time out, can be really important. Remember, when you're having a conversation, the evaluation of the situation, sometimes if you use negative language, for example, you didn't seem to take it very well leaving the room, use a softer language rather than an aggressive tone. I noticed you left the room. So you're not making any presumptions, you're not attacking them so they don't feel threatened. So having that soft language can sometimes help develop that conversation, and it doesn't wind them up anymore. Useful phrases and questions. There's a whole host and suite here. So I'll leave that in the video for you to play. I've gone wrong now somewhere. Let me go back. Pressing the wrong button. So lots of questions and phrases there. It takes practice to manage conflict. It takes practice to be a compassionate leader. It takes practice to be a coach. So you need to go away and do wider reading, and these are some good questions and phrases. Sometimes being prepared before you have the conversation, thinking about what you can say and what you can do, can make a massive difference to the outcomes. The message that you're sending, so remember body language, tone of voice, words spoken. It's the body language is the biggest one that people remember. And you've got that culture, the way that you believe, the way you've been brought up, your faith, your religion, your rituals, your behaviour. So your unconscious bias, you can project that without even realising. So just have that self-awareness. Finishing up now, just to finish, recap. We've mentioned about reflective listening. We've mentioned the importance of having rapport and relationship, empathy, summarising when you're having that open conversation, getting some coaching skills can be really powerful. Compassionate leadership can be really helpful. Neutral language and key phrases, and practice. In case you haven't guessed, never speak to Anne before she's had her morning coffee. And we've all come across personalities like that. So knowing
We've all met Anne, haven't we? Now the question is, how many of us can recognise ourselves as Anne?
I know.
And it might not be the coffee, it might be the tea, it might be breakfast. It might be, don't speak to her if she didn't get a parking place.
I know. Oh, parking. Yeah.
Let's not. Right. Okay. Sorry, I mentioned it. Move on.
Okay. All right. Then these are some useful resources. There's lots of resources. The Healthier Working Relationships Gwyler video has been recommended. I haven't watched it as yet, but that's with NHS Improvement Project. But there's lots of video. Professor Michael West does some really good talks on compassionate leadership. And that's me done. Honest.
Whoa!
On that because
no, you don't want. Don't do the evaluation thing because else they'll think it's time to stop.
Yeah. So right. Thank you guys. So that's the first part done.
I should have let you do the whole thing, Emma. Right. I think at this point, seeing we're at 8:25, I guess everybody needs to just stop a minute and nip to the loo. So we'll do that. And then it's a blooming good job I haven't got as much material as you prepared, Emma. So we'll take 5 minutes just for that quick fluid balance break. And then we'll be back. Oh. Okay. Welcome back. Hope that gave you all time to just catch your breath and sort out the fluids. Right. So I'm not quite so visual as Emma. So that's a difference in style. And for those of you who learn in different ways, hopefully that works really well, because having two lecturers who prefer different styles really helps people who learn in different styles. Now, hopefully at some point in your career, you've learned about your learning style. Somebody would have sat you down and said, oh, now what are you? And here's a questionnaire, and let's see if we can work out whether you're a visual learner, or you're an auditory learner, or you're a reflector, or you're a pragmatist, or you're activist. You know, what sort of learner are you? Well, that's not the only sort of questionnaires you can come across. There are lots of personality tests you can try, and you will find that a lot of leadership courses will teach you or will offer you Myers-Briggs. Now, usually you have to pay for Myers-Briggs, so there's my warning straight away. And what Myers-Briggs will tell you is what your personality is like, and it's highly improbable that that will change. So what you'll find if you do the Myers-Briggs questionnaire is, and you do it sort of today, in 10 years' time, if you redid it, it will probably come out the same. So your personality doesn't usually change. So I don't really want to spend time today this evening talking about personality. What I do want to talk about is your team role. So there's a guy called Meredith Belbin, who's a psychologist, and he has spent years looking at how people work in teams. Okay. Now, we work in teams at work. So I have found over many years that this is the most helpful thing psychologically about sorting out those tensions that build up between staff, particularly staff at the same level. And I've certainly got my own team to run their Belbin roles and just see what they come out at. And I have done that. I have administered the test to a variety of people coming into band 6 roles as part of the team so that they understand how they operate. So Belbin says, as you can see there, that the types of behaviour that people can engage in are completely infinite. But the useful behaviours, interesting turn of phrase, the useful behaviours that make an effective contribution, again, useful phrase, to team performance, useful phrase, is finite. So there's certain things which will contribute usefully, effectively to team performance. And he's spent years studying these, as I say, and he groups them into a set of clusters, and he talks about those as team roles. Okay. Now, his research shows that for a team to be successful, you need a diverse mix of behaviours. You need an Emma in your team and you need a Jeanette in your team. Even if on some days you really could do without an Emma in your team or without a Jeanette in your team. But you need difference. You don't need everybody to be a clone. Because if you have everybody as a clone, if everybody is exactly the same as you, I assure you, you will drive yourself nuts and round the bend. And actually the stuff that won't get done. And you might think, okay, Jeanette, that's lovely, but really? Okay, so I did this. I administered this to 2 different teams in 2 different emergency departments because we were having problems. We were having conflict between staff. And I found out why we were having conflict. And we solved it by understanding how each other behaves in a team and what they bring to that team. And then we could all be respectful of the way that other people behaved and the way they thought. And actually we could then use those preferences. So what are these Belbin roles? It would help if the slide would move on. Okay, so there's 9 of them. You might have heard of some of these, you might not. The one that people tend to have heard of is completer finisher, which in the infamous advertising line does what it says on the tin. But the others you can see there. Now they're grouped up, so we're going to have a look at these each in their groups. And I haven't been clever about this. This is just from Belbin's work, and I've taken Belbin's words exactly as advertised. So, you know, you can find this, you plug Belbin team roles into the internet and you go, Jeanette, you weren't very imaginative. No, but I'm not plagiarizing. I'm not pretending this is my work. It's his work, so his words. So the first cluster of 3 are what he calls the social roles. And the first one of those is the resource investigator. Now, what that person's like is a bit nosy, a bit, let's go and have a look. Oh, there's some ideas over there. What do you think of this idea? Isn't this great? Look at this article I was talking to, I heard at. Now, can I introduce you to this person because they might be really interesting. They tend to be very outgoing and enthusiastic people and really good at exploring opportunities and developing contacts. And I can think of at least 2 people that were absolutely, definitely this. The one was a girl I did my A&E course with many years ago when Noah was a child. But she had a black book. Japers, that woman had everything in a black book. There wasn't a thing she didn't know. And she had us all going out on various visits because of her contact book. Amazing. I had the most amazing experience on that course because she was a really good resource investigator. But there are always weaknesses with everything. And this sort of person can be a tad over optimistic. And if things need to be kept going, they lose momentum a bit. So if everyone isn't quite thrilled with the idea and doesn't kind of embrace it straight away, they can lose a bit of interest. So keeping that momentum up and what have you just isn't their skill set, really. And therefore, don't be surprised that they might forget to follow up on a lead. Now, pause. Is that you? Is that how you behave when you're working in a team of people? Or can you think who that is in your team? I'll tell you now that they're not the most common. So you might only have one, or if you've got a very large team, you might have two, but it's not a common role. The second one is a team worker. So what they're about is keeping the team together, and they're doing the kind of, let's all help everybody out here. And oh God, did you know that so-and-so's dog died? Really? Okay. Shall we sign a sympathy card? Shall we get organised on the birthdays? That sort of thing. They do teamwork to keep the team working together. That's lovely. They're very cooperative people. They're very perceptive. They're very diplomatic. They do a lot of listening like Emma wants you to do. And they do a lot of trying to smooth things over and avoid friction. But it can mean they're a bit indecisive. And it will also mean they're unlikely to make unpopular decisions. So, is that you? Is that someone in your team? My experience is there's usually several team workers. So it wouldn't be unusual to find several people behaving like that at work. And I have noticed that in job descriptions, people are often required to be a team player. It's not quite the same as a team worker. So just let's be clear. Team worker is Belbin's word for it. It's not about working as part of a team. It's how you do your bit. You know, if the apprentice came and asked for a team of you, somebody would play that role. The third social role is coordinator. And they're people who are quite good at going, okay, so what's the objectives? What we're trying to achieve here, folks? And they're quite good at listening to everybody, getting everybody to contribute their opinions. So what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And they usually speak last or say little. And they're quite good at making sure the right person gets given the right job. So the delegation is usually correct. They're also very good at spotting talent. Go, oh, so-and-so's good at that. We'll give them that job. They're very good at going, so hang on. Return here, folks. What are we trying to achieve? Oh, yes, right. Are we getting there? Okay. Now, some people see that as manipulative. It isn't. It just comes across that way. But one of the reasons it comes across as manipulative is it looks like they're offloading work so that they get left with nothing. That's not a deliberate tactic. They're not deliberately doing that. And I do need to say that coordinator in the sense of a Belbin team is not coordinator role in the department. You know, it's not about because I'm psychologically well suited to being the coordinator in a team, then I'm the only one who can be the coordinator of the department on this shift. It's not that at all. And it's really quite interesting how many people you find who are prepared to play the coordinator. There can be several, so that can be a bit of a head-on collision if you're both competing for the same role. But I have found certainly a couple of bosses of mine have very much occupied the coordinator role, quite thoughtful, spotting talent, letting the talent do its thing, and letting people get on. Maybe that rings a bell, maybe it doesn't with anybody. So they're the social roles. They're the let's get the team to do the stuff. Let's make sure the team are all right. But so far we ain't got any stuff to do. So then the next three are called the thinking roles. And the first name Belbin ever gave to this particular role was plant. And I'm going to go with that because it's probably the most commonly known term. It's a bit difficult, really. I don't know why on earth he called it a plant, really, other than they plant ideas. So maybe that. But you might find in different texts that it isn't called the plant. So these people tend to be quite quiet. They're not an Emma. They're not a Jeanette. They're not mouthing off all the time. They're quite quiet. They don't say much. And they keep coming up with ideas. Generate ideas, solve problems right here. Bring it on. You give me a problem, I'll give you a solution. They can get a bit too wound up in their brilliant ideas. And I say that as someone married to one of these people. I just warn you all. Can be fun in your marriage as well to try and work out what your relationships, to go and work out what role you naturally play in a team. But not every idea a plant comes up with is a good one. Not every idea a plant comes up with is workable. Not every idea really can be worked through at this point in time for whatever reason. But they can get a little bit grumpy about that. If they think that their ideas are not being taken on board, that they're not being valued, that they're not being worked up. But they've just got to grow up and understand that we can look at their ideas, we can work them through, and within that, there will be an absolutely diamond idea that will solve whatever the problem was, but it won't be all of them. They can be a little bit on the absent-minded or forgetful side. In my experience at work, it tends to be more that more of the chaps are plants, and they can highly irritate some of the girls who are coming along going, well, why haven't you done that? What's going on here? And the chap seems to be a little bit away with the fairies, and you think, come on. But then they'll come out with this stunning idea. So it's not always the case, but just generalizing horribly. And the third thinking role is monitor evaluator. You know how your academic tutor probably said your evaluation isn't very clear, and that's because you left it to the end of the essay. Or you know how in the nursing process it's assess, plan, implement, evaluate, and which bit of the documentation is never filled in? That would be the evaluation. What are we really, really hopeless at in an emergency department? That would be evaluating whether our pain strategies actually worked. Where is that post-pain relief pain score? Ain't there. So monitor evaluators do exactly that. Again, does what it says on the tin. They monitor what's going on in the team and they offer a judgment. And they're usually very impartial about the judgment, dispassionate really. And just kind of go, well, that isn't going to work because, and they can be really irritating for that reason. It's that person up the corner that listens to the whole debate and then goes, well, that won't work. And if you stop yourself being really irritated and just say, okay, can you explain how you've come to that conclusion? And then when you listen to them, you go, do you know what? You're right, actually. Okay, fair enough. So it's just that pause, think, and ask them to how do they get to that conclusion? They do, if you give them the choice of all, if you give them the plants ideas and you spread them out and you go, which of these is most likely to work? They'll pick it. They'll pick it quite quickly. But they will sit and listen to everything first. So they can be a little bit short on oomph and inspiring other people, a little bit overcritical, a bit slow to come to decisions, but they will be right, irritatingly. So again, you know, is that you? Do you spend a lot of time sitting there weighing things up and making a decision? Or is it someone else? Because can you jump to the person it is? It isn't always easy to spot these people. They're not very common in the grand scheme of things. It's not a much sought after team role, as it were. And it can be really surprising when you find out who your monitor evaluators are. But fascinating exercise, fascinating exercise. The third thinking role is specialist. And I have to say, I've always found the specialists a little bit tricksy. They do what it's, again, do what it says on the tin. They bring the in-depth knowledge. They're very self-starting. They're very single-minded. They're very dedicated. Find a lot of them amongst consultant nurses of different types, strangely enough. But they can get really, really blinkered in. Well, this is really, really important. This is really, really important. And you're thinking, grand scheme of things, big picture, move on, not that big a deal. But they can get really into the technicalities and overload with information. But a fabulous resource if you need to know a lot of stuff, and certainly work well in a very specialist role. Again, that's what it says on the tin. You can tell I'm not a specialist by the way I talk. But who is it in your team? Do you know who it is? It might be that person who is just encyclopedic on wound care or on ECGs or something of that ilk. You do not have to be as in-depth as the specialist, even if you're thinking, well, I can't be any good because I don't know that much stuff. Not everybody needs to know that much stuff. Only one or two people need to know that much stuff, and the rest of you can ask. So that's 3 social roles and 3 thinking roles. And then the final 3 roles are active or task roles. Now, full disclosure, I'm a shaper. I only know of one other shaper in a department I've ever worked in, which is quite handy because we didn't need to rub each other up the same way, the wrong way. The other shaper was very embarrassed to be a shaper because she thought it was a bad thing. It isn't a bad thing. And actually, if you don't have someone who behaves like this, you can lose momentum. So a shaper tends to be the sort of person who's a little bit, again, full disclosure, a little bit tidal wave. Come on, people, we are doing this. So very much, we're getting on with this. We're going to sweep you ahead. We will be doing this. Come on, everybody, let's do. But that can be, if you're not really careful, that can be really irritating to people. Some people can be quite offended by it. And you risk, if you're not really careful, coming across as aggressive and bad-tempered as you try to whip up a bit of a wave to get you lot to do this. So can be really useful, but you don't need too many of us around or you'll all be really, really cross with us. Next role is an implementer. Now, there's lots of implementers in most A&E departments. So if you give them a plan, they're really, really efficient. One of my most long-serving colleagues, or long-serving staff, really, I think, describe it, is an implementer. Absolutely out the box implementer, incredibly efficient. Give him a plan, it's sorted. He's practical, he's reliable, he's efficient. You give him an idea, he'll turn that idea that somebody else has come up with into an action, and he'll organise what work needs to be done. Bang, 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 bang. Right, that's what we got to do. But he can be a bit inflexible. He can be a bit slow to respond to new possibilities. So you have to kind of manage that, and you have to suggest and seed ideas and give him time to come around to the idea that might work, but I need to give it some thought. I need to sleep on it for about a week. And then I need to be gently persuaded. No tidal waves work, has to be more gentle persuasion. And then go, well, we could try that. That'll be the person who's really reluctant to do the rotor change or whatever. It's not a shift change, but change the way the rotor is done for whatever reason. They'll be very reluctant on that change. But once they are tasked, they will often work out how best to implement a change. They'll be really on it. And the final role, left to the end deliberately, is a completer finisher, for exactly what it says: to complete things, to finish things, to make sure that quality control is attended to. Really conscientious people, really meticulous. They want everything just tickety-boo, but they do worry. And they don't like to delegate. They're a bit control freaky. I can't. I've got to do it myself because I thought it's quite rude, really. They don't trust anybody else. And again, one of my staff is particularly like this. Absolutely incredibly strong completer finisher. Doesn't really pick or swap to another bell bin role, and can be highly irritating because she won't let go and she's a bit terrier-like about stuff. But you ask her to scrutinise a policy, you ask her to scrutinise a process, and you will get it proofread to the highest standard. So it's about tasking people appropriately, and making sure that you give them something that you want that benefit on, not something that you don't want that benefit on. So I know very clearly in my team, I'm the shaper. One of my colleagues is most definitely an implementer. One is an extreme completer finisher. And then I also have a specialist, and I have a couple of team workers. Now, I mentioned that I had tested 2 departments to see where we were going, what was the problem. And I did the test in one place, and what I'd got a load of girls who were in 6 and 7 positions, and they were always saying, the boys, fill in whatever blank you like, but it was always negative about the male staff in similar position. Well, blow me down when I tested them and we had a look at the results. There were so many girls who were completer finishers. They all wanted the I's dotted and the T's crossed and everything perfect. The boys weren't completer finishers. And what the girls hadn't recognised was that not everybody has to be the same. The boys had recognised that because they were going, well, leave them to it. They're always going on about it. And they're all champing at the bit to be the one that dots the I's and crosses the T's, so why should I bother? And the boys were quite right about that. Absolutely right about it. But fascinatingly, amongst the boys, I found a plant, I found a monitor evaluator, I found a resource investigator. I wouldn't have known that's what they were had I not asked them to do the test. Fascinating. Now, but there were some gaps. We didn't have implementers, we didn't have team workers. What was that about? So then I went to the other department And I did exactly the same there. What did I find? I found that's where all the team workers and implementers were. They were all having a lovely time, being really lovely to each other. And, you know, there was lots of cakes and birthdays and leaving do's and teas and lunches, and that's always wonderful. Were they getting any flipping work done? No, they weren't. Were they coming up with any new ideas? No, they weren't. Were they getting things properly sorted? No, they weren't. But they were having a lovely time. So just by asking people in band 6 and band 7 positions to consider how they behaved in a team and work through their questionnaires and then work out their results, and then ask all their colleagues to do it at the same time and then swap results. So you can see where we went after this. After this, I did it to every new cohort of band 6s. Every new cohort had to take the test and then share the results in the room, because every single role is needed. There is no wrong role, but you don't always need all roles simultaneously. And each of you will have 2 to 3 preferred roles. And over time that might change. So full disclosure, after I did the, after I administered the test and I found so many completer finishers, when I originally did the Belbin survey, the Belbin test, I found I was strongest role, shaper, second strongest role, completer finisher. Well, once I found all those girls going for the completer finisher role, I abandoned it. I thought, no, we don't need the competition here. We'll stop it. And I did. So that has made me a stronger shaper, because I actively abandoned the completer finisher, and probably hasn't done my housework any good not being so strong a completer finisher. But hey ho, we'll get over that one day. But the important bit there is we were sharing all the time how people work in a team and what their preferred role is, and understanding that everybody has their place, but it's not necessarily the same place. Everybody has their way of operating, but it's not the same as everybody else. Because if it is the same as everybody else, then your manager has appointed clones. And when you appoint clones, you don't get problems solved, because there's too many people thinking exactly the same way. What you do get is friction. Okay. Final line to go out on. Meredith Belbin again, let's top and tail with his quotes. A good team leader treats members of a team like actors on a stage. There need to be entrances and exits. Not everybody is needed on stage at the same time. And that does bring us to the QR code to say, zap the QR code and do an evaluation on managing conflict between staff. Remember that when you get through to that evaluation, it will ask you a variety of things, and then it will ping it into your, after you've submitted, about 10 minutes later, it'll ping into your inbox, and then you can put that into your CPD Me portfolio, so that you've got some evidence of reflection on participatory learning. And as I said, next week's lecture, because there's a 5th Thursday in the month this month, next week's lecture is on conflict between staff and patients. Thank you very much indeed for coming.